Sergeant Major Thompson was a legend on Fort Harmony. Not the kind of legend whispered in hushed tones around campfires, but the kind etched into performance reviews and spoken of with genuine respect by officers and enlisted alike. He knew the base inside and out, from the labyrinthine network of underground tunnels to the precise schedule of the mess hall's famous or infamous, depending on your taste, Meatloaf Mondays. He could fix a jammed radio with a paperclip, navigate a Humvee through a blackout, and somehow always knew when someone was trying to sneak extra dessert. He was, without a doubt, the backbone of the entire operation. Thompson was respected because he earned it. Years of dedicated service, countless successful missions, and a knack for getting the best out of everyone under his command. He was sharp, decisive, and fair. He ran a tight ship, but he also had a sense of humor that could diffuse even the tensest situations. But being a black man in a predominantly white environment meant that respect didn't always translate to equality. There were the subtle, almost invisible jabs, the surprised looks when he presented a solution to a complex problem, the assumptions that he was in charge of less important tasks, the occasional questioning of his authority by people who had no business questioning anyone. He'd hear things like, "Wow, you're really good at this," with an inflection that implied surprise a black man could be so capable. Or, during meetings, junior officers would address their questions to someone else, even when Thompson was clearly the one with the answer. These weren't blatant acts of malice, but tiny pinpricks, daily mosquito bites that slowly eroded his patience. He called them microaggressions, small, often unintentional, but definitely biased actions. He usually brushed them off, knowing he had more important things to focus on, like keeping the base running smoothly and ensuring the safety of his soldiers. But they were always there, a constant reminder that he was seen differently, judged by a different standard. He knew today would be no different, but he was ready. He always was. The dust swirled around Private Miller's boots as he stepped off the transport truck, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Fort Harmony was bigger than anything he'd ever seen. A sprawling complex of buildings, vehicles, and people buzzing with purpose. He clutched his duffel bag tightly, feeling the weight of his new responsibilities pressing down on him. He was fresh out of basic training, eager to prove himself, and terrified of making a mistake. Miller was a product of his upbringing, a small town where everyone looked and thought pretty much the same. He hadn't had much exposure to people of different backgrounds, and his understanding of the world was largely shaped by stereotypes he'd absorbed without even realizing it. As he stood there, trying to get his bearings, he spotted Sergeant Major Thompson walking purposefully across the quad. Thompson was heading towards the heavily guarded entrance of the command center, a building Miller knew was strictly off-limits to most personnel. Miller's eyes followed Thompson, taking in his dark skin, his muscular build, and his confident stride. Immediately, assumptions began to form in Miller's mind. He saw a black man near a restricted area, and his brain filled in the blanks with preconceived notions. He assumed Thompson was a low-ranking employee, perhaps a janitor or a maintenance worker. He couldn't fathom that a black man would be in a position of authority, especially not one that granted him access to the command center. He watched as Thompson flashed his ID badge to the guard and was immediately granted access. Miller frowned. Something didn't seem right. His limited worldview couldn't reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed to be true. He felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He told himself he was just being vigilant, that he was looking out for the security of the base. But deep down, he knew his judgment was clouded by something far more insidious: prejudice. The seed of doubt was planted, and it would quickly begin to grow. The doubt festered in Miller's mind all day. He tried to shake it off, to tell himself he was overreacting, but the image of Thompson entering the command center kept replaying in his head. He'd been taught in basic training to report anything suspicious, and in his warped perception, Thompson's presence near the restricted area definitely qualified. That evening, after a bland dinner of mystery meat and lukewarm mashed potatoes, Miller found himself in the rec room, trying to relax with a game of pool. He couldn't concentrate. The other soldiers' boisterous laughter and casual banter felt distant and unreal. He kept glancing towards the door, half expecting to see Thompson walk in. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He excused himself and headed straight for the office of the duty officer, Lieutenant Davies. Davies was a young, eager officer, fresh out of West Point, with a reputation for being by the book. Miller figured he'd be the perfect person to report his concerns to. He knocked nervously on the door and waited for Davies to call him in. When he did, Miller stepped inside, standing rigidly at attention. "Lieutenant Davies, Private Miller reporting as ordered," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. Davies looked up from his paperwork, a stack of forms threatening to topple over his desk. "At ease, Miller. What can I do for you?" Miller hesitated, unsure how to phrase his concerns without sounding like a complete idiot. "Sir, I think I might have seen something suspicious today." Davies raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Suspicious? Go on." Miller took a deep breath and launched into his story, recounting his observation of Thompson near the command center, emphasizing his own confusion and unease. He carefully avoided mentioning Thompson's race, but the implication hung heavy in the air. He painted a picture of a potential security breach, fueled by his own prejudice and lack of understanding. When he finished, Davies leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "So, you're saying you saw a man entering the command center, and you think he might be a security risk?" "Yes, sir," Miller replied, his voice barely a whisper. "I just thought you should know." He felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He had done his duty, but he also knew, deep down, that he might have just made a terrible mistake. Lieutenant Davies, unsure what to make of Miller's report, decided to play it safe. He couldn't dismiss it outright, but he also didn't want to cause unnecessary alarm. He instructed Miller to discreetly observe Thompson and gather any further evidence of suspicious activity. Miller, now feeling like a real-life secret agent, took his assignment with an almost comical seriousness. The next day, Miller became Thompson's shadow, trailing him from a distance, scribbling notes in a small notebook, and trying to look inconspicuous, a feat he failed at miserably. He lurked near the mess hall when Thompson was getting coffee, pretending to read a newspaper while actually watching Thompson's every move. He even tried to follow Thompson into the gym, but was turned away for not having the proper workout attire. The whole situation was ripe with humorous misunderstandings. Miller saw Thompson talking to a group of officers and assumed he was being reprimanded. In reality, Thompson was coordinating a training exercise. Miller saw Thompson examining a map of the base and concluded he was planning a sabotage mission. Thompson was actually checking evacuation routes. The tension escalated with each passing hour. Miller, convinced he was on the verge of uncovering a major security threat, became increasingly agitated. He started jumping at shadows, misinterpreting casual conversations, and generally acting paranoid. His attempts to gather evidence were clumsy and obvious, drawing attention from other soldiers who started to wonder what he was up to. One afternoon, Miller saw Thompson enter a seemingly abandoned warehouse. Convinced this was the smoking gun he needed, Miller cautiously approached the building, peering through a cracked window. He saw Thompson talking to another soldier, both of them surrounded by stacks of what looked like Christmas decorations. Miller's face flushed with embarrassment. He had spent the entire day acting like a fool, all based on his own prejudiced assumptions. But he couldn't back down now. He was in too deep. He had to find something, anything, to justify his actions. The pressure was mounting, and Miller was on the verge of cracking. Sergeant Major Thompson was no fool. He'd seen enough in his years of service to recognize when someone was acting strangely. At first, he dismissed Miller's odd behavior as rookie jitters. But as the days went on, and Miller's clumsy attempts at surveillance became increasingly obvious, Thompson realized something else was going on. He noticed Miller lurking near his office, always just out of sight. He saw him scribbling in a notebook whenever Thompson was nearby. He even caught him peering through the window of the warehouse, a look of bewildered confusion on his face. Thompson, a master of observation, quickly pieced together what was happening. He understood that Miller's actions weren't born of malice, but of ignorance and prejudice. He decided to confront the situation head-on, but with a subtle approach. He wouldn't accuse Miller directly, but he would test him, give him opportunities to reveal his true motives. One morning, Thompson approached Miller in the mess hall. "Private Miller, isn't it?" he said, his voice friendly but firm. Miller jumped, startled. "Yes, Sergeant Major," he stammered, standing rigidly at attention. Thompson smiled slightly. "Relax, son. Just wanted to ask you something. I'm looking for someone to help me move some equipment down to the motor pool. You look like a strong young man. You got a few minutes?" Miller, caught off guard, hesitated. He wanted to refuse, to continue his investigation, but he couldn't disobey a direct order. "Yes, sir," he said reluctantly. As they walked towards a motor pool, Thompson casually steered the conversation towards security protocols and base operations, asking Miller seemingly innocuous questions. "So, Private, what do you think is the most important thing about keeping this base secure?" he asked, watching Miller carefully. Miller, flustered and unsure, gave a generic answer about following the rules. Thompson nodded slowly, his eyes narrowed. He knew then that his suspicions were correct. Miller wasn't just nervous. He was actively suspicious of Thompson himself. The game was afoot. Lieutenant Davies, still unsure what to do with Miller's increasingly bizarre claims, decided to escalate the issue. He compiled a report summarizing Miller's observations, emphasizing Miller's apparent paranoia and the lack of any concrete evidence. He then forwarded the report to Colonel Reynolds, the base commander. Colonel Reynolds was a seasoned officer, a no-nonsense leader known for his calm demeanor and sharp judgment. He had seen it all in his long career, from battlefield skirmishes to bureaucratic infighting. He prided himself on his ability to assess situations quickly and make sound decisions. When he read Davies' report, he initially scoffed. The idea that Sergeant Major Thompson, one of the most respected and capable soldiers on the base, could be a security risk seemed ludicrous. He knew Thompson's record inside and out. He trusted him implicitly. However, Reynolds also knew that even the most outlandish claims deserved to be investigated, especially when security was concerned. He couldn't afford to dismiss Miller's report out of hand, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. He also sensed Davies' unease, a feeling that something wasn't quite right, even if Miller's accusations were unfounded. He decided to take a closer look himself. He wouldn't confront Thompson directly, not yet. Instead, he would observe Miller, see if he could discern the root of his suspicions. He instructed Davies to keep him informed of Miller's activities and to discreetly monitor Thompson's movements as well. Reynolds wasn't convinced that Thompson was a security risk, but he was intrigued by Miller's behavior. He sensed there was more to the story than met the eye, a deeper issue at play. He was determined to uncover the truth, whatever it may be. He knew that sometimes the most important battles were fought not on the battlefield, but in the shadows, against prejudice and misunderstanding. And he was ready to fight this one. Colonel Reynolds, acting on his decision to investigate, began observing Private Miller. It didn't take long for him to witness Miller's clumsy attempts to expose Sergeant Major Thompson. From his vantage point, Reynolds watched Miller awkwardly trailing Thompson around the base, his notebook clutched tightly in his hand, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. Reynolds saw Miller trying to eavesdrop on Thompson's conversations, often standing just close enough to be noticed, but not close enough to actually hear anything. He watched Miller stumble over his own feet while trying to follow Thompson into the motor pool, nearly tripping over a stack of tires. He even saw Miller attempt to blend in with a group of maintenance workers while Thompson was inspecting a generator, an effort that was immediately undermined by Miller's pristine uniform and obvious lack of mechanical knowledge. At first, Reynolds found the whole situation rather amusing. Miller's ineptitude was almost comical, a far cry from the image of a seasoned spy. He chuckled to himself as he watched Miller's latest failed attempt to gather evidence, shaking his head in disbelief. However, as he continued to observe Miller, Reynolds' amusement began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of concern. He realized that Miller's actions weren't just clumsy, they were fueled by something deeper, something more troubling. He saw the intensity in Miller's eyes, the unwavering conviction that Thompson was somehow a threat. He recognized the prejudice that was driving Miller's behavior, the ingrained biases that were clouding his judgment. Reynolds knew that this wasn't just a matter of a rookie making a mistake. This was a reflection of a larger problem, a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. He realized that he couldn't simply dismiss Miller's actions as harmless incompetence. He had to intervene, to confront the prejudice that was poisoning Miller's mind and threatening to undermine the entire base. The situation had gone from amusing to alarming, and Reynolds knew he had to act quickly. Just as Colonel Reynolds was preparing to confront Miller, a base-wide announcement crackled over the loudspeakers, silencing all other activity. Attention all personnel, attention all personnel. Exercise Vigilant Shield will commence at 0600 hours tomorrow. This is not a drill. All personnel are to report to their designated stations immediately upon hearing the alarm. Repeat, Exercise Vigilant Shield will commence. The announcement sent a jolt of adrenaline through everyone on the base. Exercise Vigilant Shield was the most comprehensive and demanding training exercise they conducted, designed to test the base's readiness for any potential threat, from natural disasters to enemy attacks. It involved every department, every soldier, every piece of equipment. The announcement immediately ratcheted up the pressure on Sergeant Major Thompson. As the officer in charge of base operations, he was responsible for coordinating the entire exercise, ensuring that everything ran smoothly and that all personnel were prepared. He had been working tirelessly for weeks, planning and preparing for this moment. The exercise also increased the stakes for Colonel Reynolds. He knew that the success or failure of Vigilant Shield would reflect directly on his leadership. He had to ensure that everything was in place, that every soldier was ready to perform their duty. For Private Miller, the announcement added a new layer of complexity to his already confused and misguided mission. He now saw the exercise as an opportunity to prove his suspicions about Thompson, to finally uncover the truth he believed was hidden. He imagined Thompson using the exercise as a cover for some nefarious plot, a chance to sabotage the base from within. The atmosphere on Fort Harmony became charged with tension and anticipation. Everyone knew that Vigilant Shield was a test of their skills, their training, and their resolve. But for Thompson, Reynolds, and Miller, the exercise represented something more, a collision course, a moment of reckoning that would reveal the truth and determine the fate of the base. The clock was ticking. As Sergeant Major Thompson raced against the clock to finalize preparations for Exercise Vigilant Shield, Private Miller's misguided attempts to expose him inadvertently created a real security vulnerability. Miller, convinced that Thompson was planning to sabotage the exercise, decided to take matters into his own hands. Thompson had designated a secure location for storing communication equipment vital for the exercise. Miller, believing this location was a staging ground for Thompson's sabotage, decided to investigate. Under the cover of darkness, he snuck into the designated area, intending to find evidence of Thompson's supposed plot. In his clumsy search, Miller tripped over a stack of crates, knocking over a crucial communications relay. Unaware of the damage he had caused, he hastily retreated, convinced he had prevented Thompson from carrying out his plan. He didn't realize that he had just disabled a vital piece of equipment, creating a significant gap in the base's communication network. The next morning, as Exercise Vigilant Shield commenced, the communication relay failed. Key units were unable to communicate with each other, creating confusion and hindering the base's ability to respond to simulated threats. Thompson, initially perplexed by the communication breakdown, quickly realized that something was seriously wrong. He launched an immediate investigation, determined to identify the cause of the failure and restore communication as quickly as possible. He didn't know that the source of the problem was Private Miller, whose misguided actions had inadvertently created the very security vulnerability he had been trying to prevent. The irony was thick. Miller, in his attempt to expose a non-existent threat, had actually created a real one. His prejudice and paranoia had blinded him to the true consequences of his actions. putting the entire base at risk. The situation was now critical, and Thompson had to find a way to overcome the communication breakdown before the exercise spiraled out of control. The pressure was on, and the fate of Fort Harmony hung in the balance. The communication breakdown threw Exercise Vigilant Shield into chaos. Simulated attacks were going unanswered, units were moving blindly, and the entire base was teetering on the brink of failure. Sergeant Major Thompson, despite his rising frustration and the knowledge that someone had deliberately sabotaged the exercise, remained calm and focused. He quickly assessed the situation and implemented a contingency plan. He dispatched teams to manually relay messages, rerouted communication lines through alternative channels, and utilized backup systems to maintain a semblance of order. He worked tirelessly, his voice calm and reassuring over the radio, guiding his troops through the crisis. Simultaneously, he continued to manage the overall exercise, adapting the scenarios to account for the communication limitations. He shifted priorities, focusing on areas where communication was still functional and delegating tasks to trusted subordinates. He refused to let the setback derail the entire exercise. Colonel Reynolds, observing Thompson's leadership in action, was deeply impressed. He saw Thompson's ability to remain composed under pressure, his quick thinking, and his unwavering commitment to the mission. He realized that Thompson wasn't just a competent soldier. He was an exceptional leader, capable of handling any challenge, no matter how daunting. Meanwhile, Private Miller watched the unfolding chaos with a mixture of guilt and fear. He saw the consequences of his actions, the confusion and disarray that he had inadvertently caused. He wanted to confess, to take responsibility for his mistake, but he was paralyzed by fear of the consequences. As Thompson worked tirelessly to restore order, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He knew that the communication failure wasn't accidental. It was the result of deliberate sabotage. He vowed to find the person responsible, to hold them accountable for their actions. But for now, his priority was to save the exercise, to salvage the situation and ensure the safety of his troops. He was a leader, and that's what leaders do. They rise to the occasion, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Against all odds, Exercise Vigilant Shield was a resounding success. Thanks to Sergeant Major Thompson's exceptional leadership, quick thinking, and unwavering dedication, the base managed to overcome the communication breakdown and successfully complete the exercise. Units adapted to the limited communication, demonstrating resourcefulness and resilience. Simulated threats were neutralized, and the base's defenses held strong. Colonel Reynolds was immensely impressed. He had witnessed firsthand Thompson's extraordinary ability to lead under pressure, his calm demeanor in the face of adversity, and his unwavering commitment to the mission. He knew that Thompson's leadership had been the key to the exercise's success. The success of Vigilant Shield highlighted Thompson's competence to everyone on the base, dispelling any lingering doubts about his abilities. Officers and enlisted alike praised his leadership, recognizing the vital role he had played in averting disaster. Even those who had previously harbored subtle biases against him were forced to acknowledge his exceptional skills and unwavering dedication. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Private Miller. As he watched Thompson lead the base through the crisis, he began to see him in a new light. He witnessed Thompson's competence, his leadership, and his unwavering commitment to the safety of his troops. He realized that his preconceived notions about Thompson had been completely wrong, that he had judged him unfairly based on his race and his own limited worldview. The success of the exercise forced Miller to confront his own prejudices and to acknowledge the injustice he had inflicted on Thompson. He saw the respect that Thompson commanded, the admiration that he inspired, and the positive impact that he had on everyone around him. He finally understood that Thompson wasn't a security risk. He was a hero, a leader, and a true asset to the base. The weight of his mistakes settled heavily on his shoulders, and he knew that he had to do something to make amends. With Exercise Vigilant Shield successfully concluded, Colonel Reynolds wasted no time in addressing the situation with Private Miller. He summoned Miller to his office, his expression stern but not unkind. Miller stood nervously at attention, bracing himself for the reprimand he knew was coming. "Private Miller," Reynolds began, his voice firm, "I've been observing your behavior for the past few days, and I must say, I'm deeply disappointed. Your actions have been misguided, inappropriate, and frankly, prejudiced." Miller's face flushed with shame. He knew that Reynolds was right, that he had acted based on his own flawed assumptions and biases. He lowered his head, unable to meet the colonel's gaze. Reynolds continued, "You accused Sergeant Major Thompson of being a security risk, you shadowed him, you interfered with his duties, and you even sabotaged vital communication equipment. All based on what? Your own preconceived notions and a complete lack of understanding." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Do you even know who Sergeant Major Thompson is, Private? Do you have any idea what his role is on this base?" Miller mumbled, "No, sir." Reynolds sighed. "Sergeant Major Thompson is the backbone of this entire operation. He's responsible for coordinating everything from training exercises to emergency response. He's one of the most competent and respected soldiers I've ever had the privilege of serving with. He's a leader, a mentor, and a true asset to this base." Reynolds then proceeded to detail Thompson's accomplishments, his years of dedicated service, and his unwavering commitment to the mission. He explained how Thompson had overcome countless challenges, faced down adversity, and consistently exceeded expectations. He emphasized that Thompson's race had absolutely nothing to do with his competence or his ability to lead. "Your prejudice, Private Miller, almost cost this base dearly," Reynolds concluded, his voice softening slightly. "It's time you learned a valuable lesson about judging people based on their character, not their skin color. I hope you understand the gravity of your actions and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their background." Reynolds dismissed Miller, leaving the private alone with his thoughts. Left alone in Colonel Reynolds' office, Private Miller was consumed by a wave of shock and remorse. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him, the realization of his mistake hitting him like a physical blow. He had been so blinded by his own prejudice that he had failed to see the truth, the reality of Sergeant Major Thompson's character and his invaluable contribution to the base. He replayed the events of the past few days in his mind, each scene now viewed through a new, clearer lens. He saw his clumsy attempts at surveillance, his misguided suspicions, and the disastrous consequences of his interference. He felt a deep sense of shame and regret, knowing that he had not only wronged Thompson, but had also put the entire base at risk. He thought about Thompson's calm and composed leadership during the communication breakdown, his ability to maintain order and ensure the safety of his troops despite the chaos. He realized that Thompson had been the one who had saved the day, the one who had prevented his own prejudiced actions from causing irreparable damage. The injustice he had inflicted on Thompson was now painfully clear. He had judged him unfairly, based on nothing more than the color of his skin. He had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, leading him to make assumptions that were not only wrong, but also deeply offensive. He felt a profound sense of guilt, knowing that he had betrayed the values he had sworn to uphold as a soldier. He had let his prejudice undermine his duty, his loyalty, and his commitment to serving his country. He knew that he had to do something to make amends, to try to repair the damage he had caused. He couldn't undo the past, but he could learn from his mistake and strive to be a better person, a better soldier. He resolved to confront his own prejudices, to challenge his own biases, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their background. He knew it would be a long and difficult journey, but he was determined to make it right. His first step was to apologize to Sergeant Major Thompson. Gathering all his courage, Private Miller sought out Sergeant Major Thompson. He found him in his office, poring over maps and reports, already planning for the next training exercise. Miller hesitated at the door, unsure of what to say. Thompson looked up, his expression neutral. He had heard about Miller's accusations and his clumsy attempts to expose him. He knew that Miller had been acting out of prejudice, but he also recognized that the young recruit was likely a product of his environment, someone who had never been taught to question his own biases. Miller stepped inside, standing at attention. "Sergeant Major Thompson, sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For my accusations. For my behavior. For the trouble I caused. I was wrong, sir. I judged you unfairly, and I am truly sorry." Thompson studied Miller for a moment, assessing his sincerity. He saw the remorse in his eyes, the genuine regret in his voice. He nodded slowly. "Apology accepted, Private Miller," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. He gestured for Miller to relax. "Come in, son. Let's talk." Thompson then used the opportunity to educate Miller about unconscious bias, explaining how ingrained stereotypes and prejudices can influence our perceptions and actions without us even realizing it. He shared his own experiences with microaggressions and the challenges he faced as a black man in a predominantly white environment. He didn't lecture or condemn Miller, but rather sought to enlighten him, to help him understand the root of his biases and the importance of challenging them. He emphasized that everyone has biases regardless of their background, and that the key is to be aware of them and to actively work to overcome them. "It's not enough to simply say you're not prejudiced, Private," Thompson explained. "You have to actively challenge your own assumptions, to question your own biases, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their race, their gender, or their background. It's a continuous process, a lifelong journey, but it's a journey worth taking." Thompson could see the seeds of change beginning to sprout. He had not only accepted the apology, but had inspired a new beginning. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Fort Harmony, Sergeant Major Thompson sat alone in his office, reflecting on the events of the past few days. The successful completion of Exercise Vigilant Shield had been a triumph, a testament to the resilience and dedication of the soldiers under his command. But the incident with Private Miller lingered in his mind, a reminder of the ongoing challenges he faced as a black man in a position of leadership. He knew that Miller's prejudice was not an isolated incident, that it was a symptom of a larger societal problem. He had encountered similar biases throughout his career, subtle jabs, unspoken assumptions, and unconscious prejudices that constantly tested his patience and his resolve. He acknowledged that these challenges were unlikely to disappear overnight, that the fight for equality and understanding was a long and arduous one. But he refused to be discouraged. He knew that he had a responsibility to lead by example, to challenge,